I'm 20 and I got diagnosed with bipolar recently.
Hmm.
So before that, obviously, there were a lot of mood swings, but I really did not know that I had bipolar disorder. So there was no way of managing it. It affected my relationship with people a lot. Yeah, it has
Hmm.
been a bumpy ride.
The COVID pandemic and lockdown have created a deep impact on our mental health. Many Indians have reported feeling increased levels of stress, anxiety, and even depression. How are people with mental illnesses dealing with the isolation and the continued upheaval to our everyday lives? On this podcast for World Mental Health Day, Fit speaks to two people with mental health disorders, Maria and Isha. How have they managed their mental health during the lockdown? Pandemic related anxiety, and how the news during this time has triggered them, and how they keep themselves mentally healthy. We also consult with Dr. Ruksheda Saida on self care tips, how to manage our stress in the lockdown, and how to adjust to our new normal. Isha is a 20-year-old who's been treated for anxiety since November 2019 and recently got diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1 in mid February 2020. Isha, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell me a little bit about your bipolar disorder and how you knew you had it? What were some of the symptoms that you felt?
I had read about it earlier, but I never really thought that I would have it. I read it about it on Instagram. One of my best friend's father is also bipolar, so
Okay.
she had a rough time managing uh, things at her place because of the way her father's disorder was ruining the relationship. So basically, उसके कारण I used to read about it a lot to help her and stuff like that. But I never really thought that I would have it. But then when I was getting treated for anxiety, the medication wasn't really working. Like every time I would go to the doctor, she would ask me how I was. I would always say I'm fine, and then my mother would say that no, she's not okay. She's just pretending to be okay and everything. So my mom would always tell the doctor honestly. So we talked about basically how things are. So I went on to tell him that some days I'm like, I would feel as if I could like conquer the whole damn world. I could do anything. I just had this feeling ki, हाँ यार, I can do everything. And then I would just
Hmm.
make crazy plans. I would draw charts saying I wanted to come in the list of Forbes 30 under 30. And then there were days when I wouldn't get out of the bed. No matter what anyone tried, I wouldn't just get out of the bed. So I described how I felt. And mainly it was the mood swings and I would talk really fast. Like I had speech का problem. When I would
Hmm.
start talking, I would just go on and on. बहुत speed में बात करने लग जाते हैं. So that
Hmm.
was one of the major symptoms.
Can you tell me how the lockdown in particular has sort of impacted that?
Genuinely, I think that if the lockdown wasn't there, I would have gotten much better by now. But
Hmm.
having to stay at one place constantly because we couldn't go out, we couldn't meet people, and I particularly do not share a a very good connection with my parents at an emotional level. We don't really talk and everything. So I would
Hmm.
feel really lonely. I count on a lot of my friends. I couldn't meet them.
Hmm.
Then there were other problems. Sometimes I just needed to be held. Like I just needed to
Hmm.
physically hold someone and
Hmm.
cry. But
Hmm.
I couldn't meet anyone because of the whole pandemic thing going on. So
Hmm.
that really, really impacted me a lot. And then I just started feeling really isolated. And even though no one was at fault in particular, obviously, but somehow I would just feel like everyone has just abandoned me and shit
Hmm.
like that. So that impacted me in a very negative ways. Like if I
Hmm.
would have had a low of say on a scale of 1 to 10, if I would have normally had a low of -2, it went on to -10 because of the whole corona thing going on.
Huh. So how is, because I mean corona thing and the lockdown is still going on only. So how are you sort of finding or are you able to sort of find any balance?
I started with therapy. No, after a
Hmm.
couple of months, I was on medication for a couple of months initially, but then I started with therapy, and therapy kind of really helped. After
Hmm.
each session, I would just sit down and note down. My therapist used to tell me that I should note down the key things that I learned. So for every session, we had like one particular topic of discussion. Like in one session, we would talk about anger management. In some particular session, we would talk about dealing with my childhood trauma. So that really helps. After each session, I would just sit down and write the key highlight things that I learned. So when I would feel that certain way, like when I would feel hurt maybe, so I would go back to that page and I would read, and then I would try applying that.
Yeah, it's always an up and down journey with medications and following therapy. So, what other sort of forms of self care? How else did you try to take care of yourself, or pay attention to your mental health a little bit more and try to focus on getting that better?
So during this lockdown particularly, I don't think I would have talked to people itna open up okay if this lockdown wouldn't have been there, like pros and cons basically. So I would just maybe sometimes put up a story on Instagram, like I have a private account for the close people. And then I guess that helped me to reach out to more people, because I think somehow I just feel like when I'm around people, I'm very much in control, but when I'm alone at home, I just sort of break down. So because of this whole lockdown thing going on, there were a lot of breaking points, a lot of times when I just felt like I couldn't take it anymore. Once I was like, this is the end of the damn world. And then I just overdosed. I wrote a suicide note and stuff like that. And I was like, this is all done. And then when I woke up the next day, I was hospitalized because my mom was trying to wake me up, but I wasn't getting up. So I was hospitalized and just there. And I was just thinking, how did I end up here? What got me to this point?
I'm so sorry, Isha. That sounds horrible, but it's great that your mom was with you at that time. Has the lockdown changed your relationship with your family and your parents?
Both of my parents are working, so they're busy in their own lives. But during this lockdown, we started watching movies together. We would discuss about things, and then even if I had to cry, I would always go outside of my house and cry, because I was like, घर पे मैं क्या ही explain करूँ घर वालों को सारा situation. But because I never really thought they would understand. But during the whole lockdown thing, we started talking a lot. I got a lot closer to my mother.
The lockdown has been difficult for everyone, but it has been especially difficult for those who already have mental illnesses. I want to introduce Dr. Ruksheda Saida. Welcome, doctor. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
If I'm somebody with a chronic psychiatric illness that needs to go to the hospital and get my medications from there, that's become challenging, isn't it? Because there was a lot of out-of-pocket expenses, which was again difficult. On the other hand, people who have been, lucky enough to be with families or in a protected environment and have not had to strive for food and basic necessities and everything. So that has brought about some kind of stability, because it has made life a little less stressful. Especially people with, let's say, young people struggling with social anxiety, a lot of them have reported very positive effects and impacts of it, because now the schools and colleges are online, so they don't that extra stress and burden, and they have thrived. Thankfully, the government and stepped in, and they changed they upgraded some of the laws for telepsychiatry and telemedicine, so that's helped a lot of people as well. Now more people are finding it accessible and possible to see their psychiatrists. Like I have young people who are now working more, unfortunately, but they can take a half an hour break and have a session and have a consultation. Unfortunately, those people who are now struggling with mental health issues that did not have previously, they are finding it a little bit more challenging now, because A, the recognition is not so great, B, there's so much of confusion in terms of, is it COVID related, is it mental health issues, do they need to see a psychiatrist, and access to just regular doctors, even family physicians, is challenging, because people are told to avoid going to hospitals and clinics unless and until they have to.
Can you tell me some of the issues that people are coming to you with, that people are coming to their mental health professionals with in the lockdown? What sort of things have cropped up or have gotten amplified?
So since the lockdown, there's been an increase in health-related anxieties. There has been increase in psychosomatic symptoms. There has been increase in anxieties and panic attacks because of the worry about something might happen and people are going to fall sick, and there's a lot of worry about, if somebody might have to go into quarantine and they might not come back. So there's definitely a lot of increase in those cases. There's also increase in depressive symptoms that are also either secondary to anxiety or depression in itself, because people are less, some people are more isolated, away from friends and away from social activities, maybe where they're cooped up and they're in the house, where they are not used to being that. A lot of older people who were 55 and 60 who were used to working, now, like just the other day I had a session with a doctor, and she was like, 28 years of my life I've been working every single day, and now since the last 6 months my family is not allowing me to work because I'm a certain age and I have comorbidities, and I'm going out of my mind now. I don't know what to do, and I just need to get out. So people who are not used to not working have also found it challenging, because there's only so much television you can watch, only so many activities you can do. Even though they're trying to remain healthy and indulge in, recreational activities, but also taking care of their health in terms of physical exercises and yoga. But because there is a lack of productivity in some people, that's been difficult for them, and that's increasing sense of kind of isolation as well as depression. As far as people with other chronic illnesses or serious illnesses like schizophrenia and OCD are concerned, unfortunately they're coming to the psychiatrist later. So they are, the access to care is later, and so the starting treatment is later. So those are some things that we are noticing.
We've also been talking about mental health a lot more in the lockdown. There's been a lot of discussion in the media on bipolar disorder, on depression, on mental illness. A lot of it has been misrepresented. As a professional, could you talk about, not only how triggering that is for people with mental disorders, but how it is to see the mental health discourse be so misrepresented and stereotyped?
A lot of my clients and my patients have been talking about how news, or even when they're not really they're trying to avoid news channels or newspapers and Twitter, but there's something that just get trickled in, and a lot of it's triggering in terms of not just the suicide and the extra and the negative and the misinformation about suicide that's prevalent nowadays, but also about how people are talking about mental health. And so everybody with a social media platform now talks about things with an authority, about things that they don't know. So that's been prevalent for some time, but now because it is so much, mental health is so much of focus, so it's really triggering quite a lot. And it's not just about suicide nowadays. There's also a lot about sexual violence and molestations and rapes, and that's triggering a lot of people with trauma. Also, so it's difficult to kind of like navigate any kind of social media nowadays without having some kind of issue. Just treating on a personal level, there are times that I feel like screaming, because I feel so much of good work that we've done in terms of awareness, normalizing talking about mental health, psychiatric illnesses, encouraging people to take help, trying to remove stigma from medications. All of that kind of just gets undone with just a couple of tweets here and there by people who have a voice that they're using and misusing, unfortunately. People are then checking on each other, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. Having said that, that can again be triggering in some of the patients, because they feel that, all of these days, you didn't care and you knew that I was not doing well. But now that, it's become a fashion and everybody's talking about checking on people, you're checking up on me now.
How does one take care of their mental health while living in this atmosphere, that we all unfortunately have to live with?
First thing is to do is try and remove the trigger and remove the irritant, right? So maybe switch off the notifications, maybe not go on social media, in yourself from seeing and viewing and engaging in these kind of maybe arguments or conversations is a self-preservatory first step. So the second thing what you definitely can do is that reach out to your mental health professional, speak about it, talk about it, get some perspective, get some clarity. Venting is so important. It's okay to kind of get mad at the entire world because they're doing this to you knowingly or unknowingly and irresponsibly for that matter. Speaking to other people, other mental health allies that you might have in your social circles or family circles is also very reassuring. And if you do feel that your symptoms are increasing in terms of anxiety or depression, or you're feeling more hopeless and helpless, definitely see a psychiatrist. There may be an increase in your illness that may require adjustment of medications or starting medications to begin with. Also because, the sustained amount of stress that we've been over the last 6 months, and that gets overimposed with the stress right now, that can increase your risk of having a psychiatric illness. And the most common psychiatric illnesses like depression and anxiety.
What are some self-care tips that people can do when they're triggered, and also in general to stay mentally healthy during the lockdown?
That may help somebody with either a mental health issue who's getting triggered is that, yes, look after your lifestyle, look after your healthy routines. If you've not been very actively doing your healthy routines, maybe get back to them in terms of balanced meals, regular meals, good and adequate sleep, improving on your sleep hygiene techniques, definitely exercising and getting physical activity done, improving productivity in terms of whether at work and also doing something recreational, getting in touch with people that are your social connections and who are fun and happy and who are a positive influence and a positive part of your life. These are definitely things that you need to continue doing or increase doing if you're getting triggered. Other things that you could do is channelize your frustration or your venting in a positive manner, or maybe writing a blog or writing or posting or sharing positive quotes that might help you and motivate you. That may or may not be aimed at helping somebody else, but just by sharing something positive, a lot of the times it helps us quite a lot. And other thing that is definitely something that you want to also start doing is that if you've noticed something negative on social media or somewhere else, also look at something positive that you may have seen on social media. So even if that means that you see more puppy videos or kitten videos, and that changes your algorithm, and then the organic feed is more about animals and children and toddlers laughing, then great. Take that extra step. And
then there are those who actually benefited during the lockdown, staying indoors, forced to live a clean and healthy life and actually deal with their emotions. Welcome, Miria. Can you tell us about your journey in the lockdown so far?
Fortunately for me, I've lived with my family, and my family has been fairly supportive during this lockdown. So initially, honestly, I had ended another relationship last year also, so I was in a very bad mental place. Horrible. I was again relying on vices and, finding any excuse to get drunk or, just not be in my senses mostly. And it took a toll. So also the thing with BPD is that everything feels so intense. So a breakup feels tenfold, and it might be it might not mean that much at the for you, for the other person at the moment, but for a person with BPD, it means that the whole world is crashing. Right before the lockdown, I went to Pune and I came back, and then the lockdown hit. I wasn't too upset about the lockdown. I was, of course, it took away a lot of freedom because you couldn't move out, and there was this uncertainty about what is this exactly. And, given that I had just quit my job, I was also uncertain that I would get another job. So there was a lot of weighing on me, but the fact that I didn't need a lot of human interaction was something that worked in my favor, because I do better with staying away from people, but also needing their attention, maybe on, say, on text or on call, maybe. And, it helped because I was like, okay, so this is something I need to get used to. Um, the lockdown mostly put me in a place of not constantly surrounded by people, so I wouldn't be constantly, getting this gratification that I needed. So my need, my high was not always met. Um, it would be me by my lonesome in my room, mostly working or trying to get something together. And because I started gymming, I would, work out. I would try to get some form of discipline in me. But it would leave me alone with my thoughts, a lot of it. A lot of it was just me thinking. And honestly, if you were to ask a lot of people with BPD, it would be nightmarish for them. It is a nightmare because you're left alone with your thoughts and it just goes on and on and on, right?
Yeah,
but for me, as much as I hated the fact that I would sit alone with my thoughts, I would just end up crying, laughing out at people around me, and but at the end of the day, I would just have to sit with it. And because I had to sit with it, I got significant amount of clarity on a lot of my issues. Because, when it came to me deflecting my responsibility or my toxic behavior, I say toxic because I believe it is toxic, on to other people, making them responsible for my behavior, I started sitting and writing those down, and I would speak to my therapist and I'd be like, hey, I had this kind of an epiphany today, and she'd be like, okay, why don't you write it down and let's talk about it. And I would sit and talk to her about it, and we would go into the intricacies of things. And because BPD is something where it's just layers and layers and layers and layers, so going into it was a fun activity for me, even though it honestly messed with my head to some extent. But it was more like a project, like you're reading somebody else's mind for a minute. That's how I would think it. I'd be like, okay, I have this thought. Why don't I think of it as somebody else having this thought, and why don't I analyze it in that context? So yeah, and initially I had gone back into that slump where I was using eating as a coping mechanism, and I was doing the whole nine. I was not taking my medication again. I was lashing out at people, withdrew from people, but also yelled at them because they wouldn't check on me. The whole thing. But slowly, when I started going back to my routine where eating right happened and sitting with my thoughts happened, I would force myself to sit with my thoughts.
How did you get back to that routine?
By the grace of God, I have excellent friends in Pune. And they would tell me, they would push me, they would be like, you need to do this for yourself. This is not for me. This is not for anyone. I have a fantastic personal trainer as well who would just keep checking on me to make sure that I'm okay, that I'm not eating wrong. And, one day I think he called me up and he's like, you've been doing so well so far.
Oh,
I don't see why you want to give up halfway. And I told him I just can't get up and go to the gym, or I can't go upstairs and work out. And he would be like, you don't have to work out with me or do a proper workout. Just go out for a walk. Or then I started taking up a little bit of projects, and I got some kind of reinforcement from there. And then because I started getting reinforcement from there, my anxiety started becoming a little lower. So whenever I was anxious, I would write, I would finish my projects and put it aside and send it across, and I would get a commendable report from that end. So I went back on my medication. Not to say that I don't have my bad days now. I have days where I don't do anything and I'm just sitting and lolling in bed and I'm just, looking at my laptop at my work, and I'm like, I can't do this right now. I can't be here right now. And I just want to run away. I have days like that. But now I have like vices, so to speak, healthy vices where I have taken to cooking. Cooking is something very incredibly meditative. I think working out is the answer majorly. Because it regulates your brain to think and focus in one good aspect. You're doing something good for your body, even if it means just running for like 20 minutes. Even if there's a placebo effect, you're happy, you know.
Right.